really exciting project to share with you today that I mentioned in my vlog a few videos back, and is a collaboration with 12 other artists. So hello if you're new here, my name is Katie. I'm a full-time sketchbook artist, I use a lot of mixed media, and I love to play and experiment in my sketchbooks. Today I'm actually working outside of my sketchbook, which is very different for me, but it's for a really fun project and for a good cause. So today I'm going to share all my painting process for a project called the Travelling Calendar Collective. Now this was masterminded by April, who you might watch over at MonkeyMintaka, and as I said, there are 12 of us, including April, painting a different month for the year. So we're all picking a month and painting something that's nature related or means something to us, because at the end of the year we're going to be auctioning off this calendar for the Woodland Trust. So if you've seen my work before, you know I'm a big advocate for nature, so this charity is very important and I think it will be a really lovely thing to support, and we're encouraging you to paint along with us. So my month is February, so at the beginning of the year, Omar Wynne has done hers for January, which I'll leave a picture of here, and I'm really excited to see this calendar develop as it travels across the UK and Ireland over the next 10 months. Here is a list of all of the artists that are taking part this year. I really recommend following them on socials so you can see the calendar come to life too, and like I said, paint along with us. I'll also leave a link to the webpage where you can find out more and all of our information. So without further ado, let me show you my process. I'm going to walk you through what I'm doing and why, and a little bit about the place that I've chosen to paint. A huge thank you to April for inviting me to collab on this project, and I hope you enjoy watching it come together. Okay, so we are actually starting with a plan. So I was a little bit nervous to be working outside of my sketchbook on such a sort of final thing. It's always a little bit scary when you have that pressure in your head and knowing that this is going to be auctioned off at the end. So I did do some thumbnail sketches, you can see my planning here. And the topic that I wanted to paint is the New Forest. So I grew up here, I live right on the edge of it, and it's a place that's really important to me. It's quite a popular tourist destination, but for me it just feels like home. So I was trying to work out exactly what part of the New Forest I was going to draw, and although you might think that I would do woodland, the word forest actually means royal hunting ground, and so most of the New Forest is very flat, so I really wanted to capture that, and this is the thumbnail that I decided to go with. That one I did just do a quick colour sketch, and they're not very fancy at all, but the point was that I wanted to just work out my layout. I ended up combining a few different photos for this scene on Photoshop so I could try and get a little bit of the heather and the view that I wanted. And because I want this to be really full of life and vibrant, I did start with a base layer of acrylic gouache. So I'm going to list the colours on screen in a minute so you can see, but I'm just putting down a base layer which will really help to add intensity and colour to my final piece. I love using warm base layers, and although a lot of it will be covered up, there will be little moments where it will show through, and it does affect the temperature of the paint I put on top. This calendar is from Pith, so it's a Pith calendar with obviously 12 different sheets that April is sending to each of us each month. And I definitely felt the pressure because I wanted it to be a really good thing. But as soon as I start painting, that pressure kind of fades away because I'm just having a good time and I can really get lost in the process. So as soon as that paintbrush hits the page, I start to calm down and just relax. Like I always say in my videos, I think that the hardest part is starting and you just kind of have to do it. And I definitely found that here. So on top of that acrylic gouache base, which is now dried, I'm going on top with some traditional gouache. So once again, I will leave a list of the colours that I'm using here, as well as a white, and you'll see I mix these up as I go. So I mentioned that I'm not doing a full woodland scene, but there is obviously a lot of trees around, but the thing that makes me think of the New Forest most is how flat it is and some of the open vistas that you've got. I also really love it when there's heather in the summer and the pops of purple that you can get. There's also lots of yellow from the gorse, and I really wanted to try and have an uplifting image for February. Although it doesn't necessarily match the landscape you see in February, I wanted something that was hopeful with spring around the corner and just something that was really happy to view. Using my sketches as a guide with that thumbnail that I know I want to do, I am starting to map it out with a pencil. I was really playing around in those thumbnails with where the horizon was going to be, so that was really helpful for me to work it out, and then I can transfer it to this one just really lightly. I know I will cover this up with paint, but it's just helpful to have these guiding marks. They're certainly not neat and I don't spend long doing that. It just helps me see where to put my base shapes. I also used quite a lot of brushes for this piece, all round brushes and just varying sizes. And you can see here I'm using one of my tear off palette sheets and the gouache from various different brands. The large tube was from Pebeo because I use a lot of white, and then I also use Holbein Gouache, Rowney and Winsor & Newton. So I always start with the sky because I want it to be a nice clean blue. You will find that with base layers like this, it does affect the colour that goes on top. So sometimes it's a bit of trial and error, but you can absolutely do that. I'm really trying to get lots of movement in my work, so just adjusting my colour as I go and seeing how it looks is really just part of the process. So I really wanted a lot of movement in the sky, so I constantly go back and forth to my palette, add more white, add more blue, and just use quite short and sharp brush strokes and try and get that movement from my brush. Then I'll use that blue as the base for my green, so because I wanted to show some distance and there's not many hills, they're just sort of quite big expanses of the forest, I wanted to really show that sense of distance. So I'm just layering this up slowly, and it's becoming more pigmented and brighter the closer to the camera we are, but back here it's still very faint because it is in the distance, and I think that worked really nicely. So I'm kind of moving from the background to the foreground, moving forwards through the image. So after the sky, I'm working on the back layers of the bushes. So again, I'm constantly mixing up different greens. I think it really helps to show more energy and interest in the image instead of just going really, really flat. And you can see I use my brush for quite a lot of the textures, so I use that to do the work for me, and I find that really, really helps. So I'm not overthinking at this point. I am really enjoying the process and just layering on lots of different brush strokes to try and show those bushes without being realistic. One of the things I wanted to add was a path, so I definitely have lovely memories growing up and walking through the forest. So I'm being very basic with this one. I'm just using one simple line, and I worked in that composition to have this coming through the landscape towards you. And I love that swoop and that curve, so that was really important. And I just used a bit of white and Naples yellow for that. So now that's mapped in, I can work out where the green is going. It's not super accurate to my composition sketch, which is absolutely fine. It's mostly there just to give me a guide rather than to copy it completely, and that's also why I didn't go so detailed with it. There are quite a lot of warm greens as well, so I wanted to mix up a warmer shade for the foreground, so I'm just using the raw umber and linden green and a little bit of white, so I tend to start lighter and work on top. So much more yellow green, you can see that's definitely more pigmented, and then more ochre-y as I've added in some of that raw sienna. And then I just layer it on top. So you can see a little bit there where the texture's gone a little bit odd. So you might find when you use acrylic gouache as your base and go on top with traditional gouache, it might have a weird texture and it might not be as thick as you can see I'm creating. So the important part there is to think about your ratio of paint to water. You want it really quite thick because otherwise it will resist a little bit. And where that's happened, where I've realised I've used too much water, that's fine because I can just go on top with a thicker paint. So it really is trial and error. Like I say, art is all about experimenting and playing, so don't be afraid of doing lots of different layers. You can see my brush strokes are quite short and sharp, but I think that just adds to the energy. So it's really just playing with that amount of water with the paint to get the exact right consistency. So I mentioned the heather earlier, so I'm just mixing up some purple. I did add in a little bit of opera rose and then came in with my smalt blue as well, and I just really like this. I think it's a really nice colour contrast with the greens and the yellows and obviously that lovely sky blue. And like I said, I do think of purple when I think of the forest, and I really liked layering this up. Again, I'm using my brush stroke to create those swoopy kind of curves. I think that adds a lot of interest to the image, and I really like that that really focuses on the foreground. So you can see I've got a foreground, a middle ground and a background, and so this was really helpful to just have that foreground interest. I've moved on to some smaller brushes now just to add on some of the details, and here in the corner I'm just adding in a bit of a darker green for some contrast to add in a bush. And I wasn't sure how this one would turn out, so again I'm just going with the flow. I haven't practiced this, and I was thinking about doing a test version in my sketchbook, but I'm really glad I just went for it because I think the spontaneous nature of this really shows through. I do try and add this on, but you can see it's kind of scraping away the paint, this Neocolor, and I really like that effect, so I carried it on. I tend to try stuff, and if it works then I'll carry it on. If it doesn't, I won't do it again. But I really like that. You can see it's kind of carved through that paint to have that line and the orange showing through from the base layer. And now I'm just adding on some suggestion of ferns, which again is something I think of with the forest, and adding those on quite thickly and crudely with this little brush. But again, I really like this paint stroke kind of effect and that texture. And I think little details like this with these small marks really make a difference. I'm a big fan of just trying things out and seeing if it works, and there's not really any difference from working in my sketchbook to doing it here because I'm still playing around as I go and I don't necessarily know how it will turn out, but I had a really good feeling at this point, so I'm just carrying on, adding on a few more colours, but I'm just kind of dotting around, adding a few little touches here and there where I'm not completely happy, and this is definitely a bit more of my process than I usually show, so you can really see it come alive. So I add on some paint here, and this ties in with me just trying things, and I realised I really didn't like that. This one turned out better, so again, using my brush for that texture just to try and suggest a bigger tree back here, which was in the reference from a photo I took near Boulderwood Deer Sanctuary. But I didn't like those marks I made, and the beauty of paint is that you can just paint over it, so I really wanted to show that and include it, and you'll see I'll come back and cover it up a little bit more once that first layer's dried. Because it just didn't work out, but it's not the end of the world, I'll just paint over it. And sometimes it will muddy things up and change the layer that you have underneath, but I think that was more important to fix. And yeah, it is just paint, so just play around and try things because it's not the end of the world if it doesn't work out. You can always just fix it later once it's dry. So again, trying to balance some of those really thick, juicy brush strokes with some smaller marks. Usually I would do a lot more pencils, but here is how it's looking at this stage with just the paint layers. So before I move on to the pencils and Neocolor layer, I'm actually coming in with some collage. So one of the things that the New Forest is quite famous and well known for are their New Forest ponies. You often see them just roaming around, they have verderers, but they'll just be on the side of the road, and I feel like as a resident here, I should say you're not supposed to touch them. Please don't touch the wild animals. They are wild. And you do see that happen a lot, but I think it's a really lovely element of the New Forest. So I did want to include a New Forest pony in my image. Now I wasn't sure on this one. I really wasn't sure whether I should add it in, whether I would mess it up completely. So I'm using collage, and this is a really great way to try things out. You can see I use my paint palette sheets, I've mentioned that before, where I've been painting, and I keep those for this reason. I'm just touching up some of the brown. I wasn't sure if I would use this as the final horse or whether I would paint onto it, but it was really helpful again for me to play, so I wanted to see where it would fit best, whether it would work where I thought it would or if I should try it somewhere else, and the beauty of collage is you can just pick it up and move it. I do like this horse, I think it worked well, but it didn't kind of feel natural to have that collage around the rest of the painty brush strokes. So although this was helpful for me to work out that yes, I did want a horse, and yes, I definitely wanted it in that location, it didn't feel right to just stick that on. But it was really helpful for me to test it out, so I really encourage you to use collage if you're ever unsure about adding something in, or like I say, you can just paint it in and then cover it up later, but I thought this was a good little way to test it out. So now I'm coming in to paint the horse. I think it was helpful that I had just had Animal Month on Patreon for January because I felt a lot more confident painting this horse than I probably would have beforehand. I tend to never paint animals or people in my work, but like I said, the New Forest pony is definitely part of this landscape, so I'm really glad I added that one in. I was losing a bit of light here, but I was determined to finish it in one sitting. So I'm just coming in with some Neocolors here, my usual pops of colour, so that lovely Chinese green and then some sky blue as well. Here I'm adding on a little bit more interest and contrast, and also adding some extra little texture to the foreground sort of heather. I don't know that it necessarily reads as heather, but I think it does work, and again, I really love the colours. I try not to go with very flat colour, I'll constantly go back and forth to my palette to add in more pink or white, and that was definitely the case there. Now finally for some pencils, so like I said earlier, I usually add a lot more of this on, but I actually use the paint to do most of the work, so this was mostly just to finish things off, make it feel a little bit more purposeful, and add on some texture. I covered up the original February, so I've added that here, just in the exact same place and underlined it, and then I signed my work with the name of the place and my name. So I really hope you enjoyed watching this come together. Usually my process videos don't show the full thing because I always feel like it's a bit boring, but I hope you enjoyed this one. I'm really proud of this piece and I'm very happy for it to be in the final calendar. I'd love to know your thoughts down below of what you think of this, if you've ever visited the New Forest and feel like it matches the vibe of the place, or if maybe you're inspired to do so. or even a painting inspired by where you live. I'm really looking forward to seeing what the other artists create for their own month, so be sure to follow our hashtag, the Travelling Calendar Collective, over on Instagram, and check out their socials too. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you next Sunday in my new YouTube video. See you later!